Okay, welcome everybody. All right, the first thing I want to talk about is your 1/4 inch seam. A lot of you have a 1/4 inch foot or you have a 1/4 inch marking on your machine or something like that. But before you start, I want you to take a scrap of fabric and literally sew it. Oh, I moved my needle. So I think this is where I need to be. So I'm going to sew this on just a scrap and I'm going to line it up where I always line it up at, like where I visually line up the edge of the fabric to the edge of the foot, because we're all a little bit different. Okay, so once I've sewn this, then I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to literally measure it and see if it really is a 1/4 inch, because you'll be surprised at sometimes it's a generous quarter or a very scant quarter. So if we start at the beginning with everybody getting a 1/4 inch um, seam allowance, that would be great. Um, just get that out of the way. So once you got that going, then it's going to really help. Okay, so to make the block, I want to put my needle back in the center for what we're doing. So you're going to have a bunch of small squares. And what you're going to do is with all these small squares, you're going to mark a diagonal line on the back side. So I brought out a friction pen, but it's a little bit different. Instead of like an ink pen like these other ones are, this is more like a felt pen, and I kind of like them. So I'm just going to mark that diagonal line on the back side. And so you can see the line on here. So you're going to do all of them. I'm just going to do 2 because I already marked the rest. Okay, so this block has a lot of repetition. Okay. So I'm going to take a white rectangle and I'm going to put the square I just marked in a corner of the rectangle, just so it's perfectly lined up in the corner and I have my diagonal line going. It's really hard to see the picture which way it's going, but you just want it to go, in one direction. Okay, really doesn't matter. I'm going to go in this direction. The second one is the most important one. So I'm going to have it go this way. And when I start sewing, I like to start sewing here where my finger is. I find that it sews really nice and clean. If you sometimes machines, if you start at this pointy point, your machine will eat it. And if you know what I'm talking about, you want to avoid that by starting at this end. So then it won't eat that point. So I am going to line it all up. You can pin it in place. Just make sure it's all lined up really nice. Okay, so it's in the corner, really nice. And I'm going to sew right on that mark line, right on it. Okay, so let me do that. Oh, let me talk about stitch length. I like to use a stitch length of 2.0. I like 2.0 because it's a nice tight stitch. You can still rip it out, but it doesn't come apart at the ends like a 2.5 or a 3.0 will. I find with a longer stitch length, it'll start unsewing, unraveling. Okay, so I've sewn on that one. I'm just going to do, well, actually, let me do the opposite side. Okay, so my diagonal line is going this way. So when I put my other one on, I want it going in the opposite direction. Take this pin out. Okay, so this one goes this way, and I want this one to go in the opposite direction. Okay, so let me go ahead and sew that. Okay, so then when I iron it back, it's going to look like this. Okay, but I have more to make. So let me do the other half of the blue one, because to make this thimble block, I need 2 per block. Okay, so I'm just going to sew this. But if you need to pin it, you go ahead and pin it. So again, I'm sewing right on that marked line. Let me do the other one. Again, opposite direction. Okay, so I have 2 of these things made. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to iron it flat first. I like to kind of set the seam. So I've set the seam, and then I'm going to fold it back on both sides. And I like to leave everything intact while I fold it back and iron. Okay, so there's one. And be careful you're not distorting anything as you're pressing. So this is what I have. But if you look at the back side, there are 3 layers of fabric, and I don't want all those 3. I am way off the camera, aren't I? Sorry. So I have these 2 extra pieces of fabric back here, so I'm just going to trim those to about 1/4 inch. And sometimes I just wing it, but for you guys, I will help you very accurate. All right, so this is what I have, and this is what it looks like on the back side. So I like to press it first and then trim. I find it keeps it more stable if you press it first and then trim it than if you trim it now and then press it. I find if I trim it now and press it, it distorts the shape more. So I like to press first and then trim. Okay, so I pressed it. Now I'm going to trim that to about 1/4 inch. All right, so I now have 2 of these. So what I'm going to do is I'll put it up on the board for a second so you can see what it's going to look like. Is this too low? So that is going to make our spool. Okay, so I'm just going to sew these 3 things together. All right, so I'm sewing these 2 together, and I want to make sure my ends meet here, and I want my ends to meet at the other end. And sometimes we want to just sew it and one piece ends up longer than the other, and we really want to make sure that they end up at the same place. Okay, so you can pin it or you can just sew it, and I need to move my needle so I get that 1/4 inch. Is it working?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it bouncing? Okay, so I've sewn it from end to end. I made sure my ends meet. And then when I press it, I want to press it towards this plain rectangle because it'll be nice and flat towards that plain rectangle. All right, so here's half of it, and then I need to sew this part on. Same thing, make sure my ends meet. Okay, so I've sewn this. I'm going to press it flat first to set the seam, and then I'm going to again press it towards the middle because it's nice and flat. I won't have any bumpy seam allowances if I go that way. All right. Put it up like that. All right, so that's one. So we're going to do the same thing with the other one. I've already marked the lines on here, so I'm going to put them in the corner. I keep changing where the needle is because sometimes I need a 1/4 inch and sometimes I need my needle in the center. So again, the first one doesn't really matter where it points. It's the second one that matters the most. Okay, again, I want to start here and not here. I'm going to do them at the same time, do some chain sewing. Okay, so I'm going to put this one in and just sew it right after the other one. Okay, so then I'm going to take my second one, my second corner, and make sure they're going in opposite directions. Take the other one, again, opposite. All right, so now that I've sewn both of them, I'm going to press. On the other side. So it looks like this. Do the other one. right, so I've done both of these. Now I'm going to trim. So I could use the rotary cutter. You could use scissors. I am not a scissor person, but you can. So that would be scissors, but I typically use a rotary cutter for everything. All right, so now that I have these done, I'm going to sew it to this. This is going to be my other thimble. And it really doesn't matter which piece you have on top. You can kind of control where the seam is if you have this one on top. My needle's in the wrong place. And if you prefer to pin it, because I'm just holding it all, but if you prefer to pin it, please go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to press it towards the middle again. Okay, so I'm going to sew this one. Okay. I have another thimble done. Thimble. Spool. Thank you. All right. Move this. Okay, so now it's just a matter of sewing these together. I'm going to sew these two together. Again, I want to begin and end at the same place. Making sure my seams are doing the right thing underneath. Okay, when I iron this, I'm going to iron it towards this side because I have 1, 2, 3, 4 seams on this side and 2 seams on that side. So I'm going to go to the side that has fewer seams. All right. Again, I'm going to sew this. Okay, so back side again, if I sew to this gray or press towards the gray side, it'll be flatter. And it's also the opposite direction when we put them together. So this seam is pressed this way, that seam is pressed that way, so they're now in opposite directions. I'm going to put these together. Oops. And I'm going to use a pin. So I find where the seams meet, and I'm going to put a pin in right where those seams meet. Okay, so what I do is I butt up the seams until I feel that they are like touching each other. Put a pin in just like 1/8 of an inch away from the seam because I want it to be really close to where that seam is. And if I want to pin the beginning and the ends, I can do that too. Just going to hold it. Okay, so I want my edges to line up as I sew. And sometimes I have to move one piece or the other to slide it so that they meet. Okay. So if I look at it, my center seam meets because I pinned it right there. It's all about pinning it and then stitching right up until you get to that pin, like a stitch or two before the pin. If you take out your pin too early, then it'll sometimes move on you. So now I'm just going to press it to a side. And I like to, wherever these seams are, I like to encourage it a little bit by giving a little press with my finger. And I find if I just run my iron over it, it will kind of distort right there. All right. All right, so we have 2 colorways. Okay. All right.